they've got so much of their company's workflow tied up in these platforms, they can't just flick a switch and suddenly vibe code it away. It ain't going to happen. When I look at the markets and see where I think the more entrenched value is probably more in the workflow type company.
Agentic is having its boom. I mean, we saw OpenClaw come out where we've got the lobster invasion. After they went through like a variety of iterations on their name, which all seemed a bit crazy.
Can of worms for cybersecurity. So I
Yeah.
think it's interesting. Early days. I do actually think it is a definitely it's like a chat GPT moment in the agentic sort of sphere. So I think it's amazing.
But the way that the this person was explaining it to me is like, look, we just basically have to do the same for these agents that we would do with this junior employee of setting up this sort of sandbox, ring-fenced area where they can still perform a job function, but they can't cross the boundaries to where they could cause potential damage. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Sea of Startups. I am your host, Kevin Brocklin, and today with me is Chris Burrell in the hot seat. We're going to be talking about the SaaSpocalypse, the rise of space lobsters, and really just touching on the topics that are hitting the news lately, putting it in context for Southeast Asia. Chris, thank you very much for being here with me.
Thanks, Kevin. It's great to be back on the show again.
So I guess the first topic that we'll talk about is the one that's been running the news line lately, which is the SaaS apocalypse. If you look at public software stocks, they took a massive haircut. We just saw red across the board. I think it was TechCrunch, the one that coined the phrase SaaS apocalypse. And essentially, we're just seeing a switch over in it. So curious your thoughts. You've worked in large corporates. You've been across the board, both on the investor side, on the operator side. Are we overdoing this, or is the doom and gloom real?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very topical subject, and it's always the case with public markets. You always have a narrative that drives the sentiment. And obviously this was a downward sentiment on the traditional SaaS players in the market. And I think it's with some justification. I think that um, the publicly traded SaaS companies, I think, have been fairly juicy in their valuations. So I think that from a point of view of purely just valuations, I think it maybe is a little bit of a haircut was probably ready. But in terms of the kind of overall SaaS apocalypse, I don't buy it. I think that's too much of a generalization. I think in the narrative around AI and where that will drive valuations of tech companies is, um, you know, definitely, and there's enough room for the incumbents to continue to grow their businesses and probably increase their margins through productivity increases or layoffs or what have you. But at the same time, I think some of the incumbents will probably maybe not recover because maybe they're very susceptible to this kind of disruption. So yeah, I think there's some truth in it, but I'm not buying the whole apocalyptic narrative.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I mean, one aspect is when the pendulum swings, it always overcorrects to one side or the other. So we've definitely got too much of a sell-off. And when you dig into some of these public market companies, they're still growing. You're
Yeah,
seeing like 15-20% year on year growth, which is slower than it was. So I guess if we're talking about like a discounted cash flow of future earnings, maybe the 5 years out sort of viewpoint is getting more shaded. But these companies are still growing. So I think the question on my list is really like, have we learned the lessons of the past, or are we going to become the Blockbusters, the Kodak, those business school case studies of the companies that just didn't adapt to the changing landscape of technology? Because to be honest with you, when you also look at a lot of these public market companies, their cash balances are very strong. Can they actually adjust? Can they maintain their position? And can they evolve to the new era? I think is the main questions in my book.
Oh, absolutely. And at the end of the day, these, the economic buyer of this software is the CIOs and the CISOs and the chief digital officers of all these big companies. They've got so much of their company's workflow tied up in these platforms, they can't just flick a switch and suddenly vibe code it away. It ain't going to happen. Now, there's enormous pressure on these companies now to, from typically from the board level to, you know, become more AI savvy, invest in AI, become agentic, all this kind of, narratives you hear. But at the end of the day, that's going to take time.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe the incumbent will capture some of that growth. Maybe they won't. So I think it's really um, you know, I'm not a public market equity picker, but I'm sure that the guys that are probably now investing heavily in some of those stocks that have taken a haircut that they think will have upside. So, I think that, there's probably an opportunity here now for public equity stock pickers as well.
Yeah, yeah, I would tend to agree, and I do think coming back to one of the comments that you made earlier is that the risk factor isn't evenly distributed amongst all of these public SaaS companies either. Like if you dig deeper into them of who has the more defensible moat, you had commented that so much of the workflows are tied up with these different SaaS players. The deeper those connections are, companies just hate change management. To change workflows, to transition and make large transition, especially when there's sensitive workflow, sensitive data, when there's these sort of aspects passing through it. It's not necessarily that it's impossible, but there's friction in those changes, and that is the opportunity for some of the incumbents. Whereas if you're just kind of a point solution or a surface level player, you're probably going to be much more at risk. And I think, one of the ones that I was talking about relatively recently was like Figma that went public recently. That stock is down terribly. Relatedly, Adobe, which is also not doing so fantastic. Maybe they would have been better together if that wasn't blocked. But it's still that same sort of surface level because like a PDF viewer, the editing tools that they have as well, are they that entrenched or are those too easily replaceable?
I think now that you kind of mentioned sort of specific perhaps verticals on the creative side, I think they're probably more under threat. If you think about the image manipulation tools, some of the user interface code generating tools available now, yeah, maybe Figma and Adobe are under threat. So I think that in certain areas, yeah, I can see Claude and Anthropic, or Anthropic and Google and OpenAI definitely eating into their business. Uh, you know, I- when I look at the markets and see where I think the more entrenched value is probably more in the workflow type companies. So, all your Salesforce service now, uh, Oracle, all these companies, I think they ain't they're already generating a lot of free cash flow. They're not going away anytime soon.
No, somebody's not going to vibe code away a Salesforce. I mean, There's a lot of complexity. I mean, the tool's so complex that there's an entire industry of consultants just to help you figure out how to set it up and how to use it.
Yeah. No, if anything, they're really well positioned to sell their agentic AI type solutions that they've already heavily invested in.
No, that's very true. But I am curious. So when you talk about the ones that you think are tied into workflows, how does this affect the way that you're looking at startups? Because this is something that I'm constantly thinking about myself. Because if we're seeing the incumbents coming under threat, what does that mean? Because the same startups that we're looking at could also be under threat from very well funded foundational models. You know, OpenAI just got $110 billion. What are they going to spend it on? Gemini, I mean, Google has massive cash flow, still kicking it off. They could fund that forever. They're tied in through a number of areas. Where is the space, or like, maybe not necessarily vertical, but maybe kind of getting an understanding more on like thesis points of how you put a lens to it.
Yeah, so for my niche fund, I am looking at what areas in the software stack can companies build reusable components that are more on the deterministic side, that suit the new world of code generators. So they'll be reusable components. So if you think about something like AML or KYC as a service, that's very hard to do using just Claude or Gemini. I can't say, give me a KYC check on Chris just by, prompting that. I need to
And you don't
go and
want
check it.
hallucinations either.
Definitely. Yeah, so I think there's certain areas where I see um, that there are reusable software components that are probably less obvious than sort of the traditional sort of vertical SaaS type companies. So I think in terms of uh, the founders that maybe have some kind of vertical expertise but know how to build software components and then perhaps turn them into some type of agent that can be then used by all of these AI tools, I think is an area that I'm very interested in. But I also think that out here in Southeast Asia, there's certain regional nuances that definitely the regional founders are going to be able to tackle in a lot better uh, way than like your kind of sort of one size fits all solution.
No,
So
I
there's a
would
couple
definitely agree
areas.
on that. Yeah, yeah. Southeast Asia has perpetually had this issue where if there is a foreign tech that wants to target Southeast Asia, they basically put like one biz dev person over in Singapore, say job done, treat it as one single homogenous region that they can tackle with that single headcount, and it just doesn't end up working very well. We also have the additional challenge where, like, if you think about Southeast Asia, there's always been this sort of build versus buy dilemma because labor is so cheap that there's often this sort of, if your software is a headcount replacement, cost saving, efficiency saving, is it costing me more than if I just threw more bodies at it? And that also
Yeah.
plays into the aspect that companies aren't very digitalized to begin with. They're familiar with hiring, they're familiar with that. So there's also this sort of gap. But I guess if we're looking at the modern era as well, that may also play into whether or not they just want to take ownership and build their own tool, especially for maybe some of the small and mid-size. Um, where maybe they have a young up and comer that they're just say, hey, why don't you just build me the tool for this?
Yeah, no, I can definitely see that happening for sure. Particularly if the cost of tokens keeps coming down. So if you can use some kind of a maybe even like a local model, like a Kimi or something like that. Put it on your own server in your factory or whatever you are, SME, and have one or two of your kind of young sort of or maybe not even young, but sort of more AI savvy staff to replace some of the technology spend that you would have otherwise made, or potentially replace some of the manpower. But one of the great things about AI, as we know, is it's really good at unstructured data, which it
Yep.
never used to be. And that used to be tackled in Asia by a lot of people. So,
Yep.
your
Yep.
kind of
You'd have
BPO
BPOs
type
just like people
operations,
processing. Yeah.
I mean, that's rife for disruption, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can see the BPO companies, the ones that have already a good existing customer base, just actually really creating a huge, potential uplift in their margins, actually, if they do it the right way.
Yeah, I've been looking for that as well, to be honest with you. So like I had this thesis of wondering of whether or not, I looked at some of the really large BPOs and figured that they were too drunk on their own cash generation to really bother wanting to change, just because those bigger ones have been immensely profitable. But those sort of mid-sized ones, they have founders that are still very much of like hustlers and that sort of mentality, very sort of founder sort of like hustle culture. I've been waiting to see those ones actually, like, whether they're implementing it themselves in order to become more efficient, or because they have that service orientation, what if they just end up becoming product creators, where it kind of fits into this aspect of like, instead of software as a service, you're creating services as software, which is essentially the agentic era. I've been waiting to see that. I haven't seen it happen, but I do, when I think of where things should come from, I do have a thesis that I'm waiting to see whether or not, and so I'm keeping tabs out there on that. Let me tell you about our friends at Your CFO, the financial planning system for your B2B startup's growth. Running a business is hard enough. You're focused on product, you're focused on sales. You don't have time to hire your own CFO or maybe even your own bookkeepers, and your CFO is here to help. Building your forecast is easy as one, two, three. You set your business as usual case, then you set up what your growth initiatives are going to be, whether it's launching new products, hiring plans, market expansion, and put those all together and generate your final forecast. And with your projections set, you can run variance analysis, stay ahead of any shortcoming or overachievement so that you can adjust in real time. Need to look forward? You can build out your rolling forecast. As the actuals update, you have new and improved forecasts. Have fundraising plans in the future? Build out your forecasted cap table. Understand what metrics you need to hit those valuation targets. And last but not least, all those board reports, investor reports, fundraising, financial projections, all exportable, all buildable, all in one place. So go to yourcfo.tech. That's yourcfo.tech to get started today and make an impact on your business.
Yeah, I've started to see it in the Australian market, so pay very close attention to the managed service provider market in
Mm.
Australia. And there's a lot of now tool companies coming out with plays around that. The problem is they're all very much of a muchness. There's no real, like what I'm seeing is there's a lot of companies getting created that kind of do more of like a AI overlay on top of an existing workflow. And it doesn't really it's not going to create like a 100x type startup investment environment. It's going to create like a 5x. So it's different to your traditional software where once you kind of get the product market fit, you then can just find your distribution channels across the world and create massive growth with
Yeah.
very little additional inputs. This is more of um, a play on becoming more efficient as a managed service provider. So yeah, I think there's definitely possibilities where you can arbitrage the labor for an AI agent, but I don't see that kind of same like dynamic in terms of creating like a global software business that I do in previous eras. But maybe it's because it's early days. So maybe, I mean, take maybe a founder coming out of a BPO business
Mm.
who's like kind of at that era in his career where he wants to make a name for himself, and he's kind of got this burning desire to solve the problem. Like, he sees that the way that his current company's doing it is pretty labor intensive, and he wakes up in the morning one day and goes, "Shit, I know how to do this, and I could create the next, BPO giant if we did
Yeah.
it this way." So I
Yeah.
think that's maybe what we haven't seen yet, but maybe I think it's definitely coming.
It's coming. I mean, agentic is having its boom. I mean, we saw OpenClaw come out where we've got the lobster invasion. After they went through like a variety of iterations on their name, which all seemed a bit crazy, but it's open source agentic assistant. Obviously, it has its flaws because we're talking about like issues with security permissions. What are you really going to trust it with? Is it going to burn the house down? Sort of risks and all of that, but when you think about what it is capable of doing, if you set up the proper environment, I mean, you can basically have 24/7 operations. And I can't remember the source, but I was seeing something that was saying that like the vast majority of Claude tokens that are being spent now are going via OpenRouter, which is basically like indicating that it's probably OpenClaw that's um, driving a lot of the usage. So it seems that is definitely going to end up being another major changing point, especially when we talk about like MSPs and BPOs and those sort of things there as well.
Absolutely. I heard another very interesting leading indicator on that is that Mac Minis are sold out in certain countries now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's even the secondary market. I heard is getting quite hot for for them because everybody says taking note.
Yeah. No, funnily enough, I have an old Mac Mini sitting around that I've got my intern setting up OpenClaw on now. But
Okay, I went the VSP route actually.
right. Well, I'm very cautious though. I think that I come from a cybersecurity background,
Mm,
and I can just see this as a whole nother can of worms for cybersecurity. So I think
yeah.
it's interesting, early days. I do actually think it is a definitely it's like a chat GPT moment in the
Mm,
agentic sort of sphere. So I think it's amazing. Like, I really think it's mind blowing, the different paradigm
yeah.
of basically replacing yourself with a with an agent that has full access to your PC and everything on it, and then just asking it to just go. Yeah, off you go.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I'm
yeah.
very very worried in terms of
What
what
could go
that
wrong, you
means.
know?
Yeah, what could go wrong? I mean, I've heard of cases of people setting up OpenClaw and then they're getting like scammed by their own agent. It's got access to their bank account somehow, and
Yeah,
uh,
the bank account is probably one that that's a step too far for me. I
yeah.
probably wouldn't go that route. But I had somebody describe it to me and they said, look, if you're a company and you're hiring a junior employee, you have to give them some level of permission so that they can perform a job function. But you're always trying to ring fence these to make sure that they can't mess up too much. Like they can't cause irreparable damage. So
Mm.
again, not a cybersecurity expert, so I'm curious your opinion on this. But the way that the this person was explaining it to me is like, look, we just basically have to do the same for these agents that we would do with this junior employee of setting up this sort of sandbox ring fenced area where they can still perform a job function, but they can't cross the boundaries to where they could cause potential damage. Uh, is that viable, or is that like
Yeah, no, this is a fantastic topic. So, uh, I did actually invest in an agentic AI cybersecurity company out of Melbourne called Prefactor, And this is the exact question that they ask. And they run a lot of workshops now with AI builders in Australia. And it's a different paradigm. So an agent is sort of like a person, but it's really not a person. So
We name them like people, though.
we
We're
do,
giving
we
them.
name them like people, but they're not, right? They're like they're like what ghosts, I guess people are calling them now, right? So
Yeah.
they're really
Replicas.
like
I've heard
yeah,
replicas a lot as well,
replicas or
which seems like we're
um,
entering the Clone Wars soon.
yeah, or gremlins, or I don't know what you want to call them, but it's really interesting because what kind of the typical guardrails you put on your local PC is you have some kind of like like a antivirus, and then you may have some kind of endpoint remedy software like a CloudStrike or something that's looking for different behavior. But what are the guardrails you put on an agent, right? Um, do you have to start building, things that check everything that they do? I mean, the one of the approaches that my company's taking is really around a visibility. So just logging everything that they do. So whenever they make a decision, you log it, and then you can retrospectively start to put more guardrails around it. But is that like too late? Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So I think it's early days. I think the next RSA conference in San Francisco is coming up in March, I think. I'm sure like half of the startups there will be agentic AI governance and security companies. I'm totally sure of it because it's a whole new area, and that's going to be a major sticking point for most corporates that want to adopt agentic AIs. They're going to want to have the all of the security infrastructure ready to be able to deal with it. I mean, anecdotally, I won't tell you the name of the company, but Prefactor have a pilot customer in Australia, and they told them they have 10,000 agents running on their network at the moment.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, you can
I,
imagine some
I
companies have a lot of like they have all these coding agents and customer
yeah.
support agents and what have you. I mean, that's a freaking security, CISO's freaking nightmare.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've followed a number of organizations that have a lot of that are utilizing a lot of agents, and a lot of the agents are designed very sort of function specific. But then you have to create essentially like an hierarchy of an organization because you have a whole bunch of individual functional agents. You have an orchestration layer on top that then leads to the next step in the workflow broken down by more functional AI agents, orchestration layer rolling it up again. And so like the multiplication effect, you actually end up needing a lot of human elements just to be able to figure out how do you actually manage all of this, let alone the aspect that you said of having your CISO, your team actually understanding the potential risks associated with this exponential explosion. Kind of makes you wonder of like, are these really like AI assistants, AI agents, or are we just letting the Trojan horse into the organization?
That's the problem, right? So that the auditors and risk managers at all these big companies have a legal fiduciary responsibility to make sure their companies are not letting out PII or potentially intellectual property or financial data, and they can go to jail, right? Seriously. So there's a massive um, problem brewing there, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interesting agentic AI, security and governance companies coming out of this for sure.
Yeah, yeah. But there's a cost explosion on this as well, you know. So like I was just listening to one where it's their entire thesis was design an agency utilizing AI, undercut the price on software for a lot of these companies that have like 80% margin. And so recently he said his AI budget is tripling, but his revenue is not. And so like what seemed like the promise of efficiency, is it really getting there? And then, especially if you're talking OpenClaw and you're just letting it run autonomously and running these tasks, if you're using Claude tokens, that bill's going to add up. But then if you end
Yeah.
up replacing it with like a Kimi or something like that, not really as reliable. So then that just opens up the door in regards to, how are we really managing this? Again, we're super early days, so a lot of this is just probably just the beginning, and it'll get solved. But it does make you wonder that where is the direction of this going? And an additional point that I'd make on this as well, which is more on the positive side, is the changing of interface, because with using OpenClaw, for example, instead of actually having to be on my laptop or in a web browser doing the work or using a SaaS tool, I could be on the go, sitting in the back of a Grab taxi, just messaging on WhatsApp as if it's an actual person, or maybe Telegram, or Telegram's easier to set up, but it could be sitting in WhatsApp or wherever. So the change of the way that we're communicating with technology, the challenge of the cost base, the challenge with the security, it seems like we're just like in really early innings here.
Oh yeah, I'll definitely agree with that. I think that we're like the first web browser came out in like 1993, I think it was. Um, and then 94 was when they rebranded it to Netscape. We're that kind of level of sophistication with agentic AI. I think we're like really primitive, early days. Most of the companies that are going to get founded around this paradigm probably haven't even started yet. So, I think
It's true.
the exciting thing for us, Kevin, as early stage VCs, is that we're hopefully going to get exposed to this, massive disruption over the next few years, and it's really exciting times.
I, I do
Mm.
agree that it's super exciting times. I think there's a lot of opportunity for startups. Um, notwithstanding, there's inevitably going to be a lot of disruption, and a lot of the talking heads out in the market, especially if you go into the mainstream news or otherwise. And it also is very clickbaity as well, which is another topic that I wanted to bring up, because I think one of the most virally shared Substack posts that I've seen in a bit of time was this Citrini research, which basically positioned themselves as if it was the year 2028, and they were looking back in time and kind of explaining like a post-mortem from the future, of what led to the massive declines in the stock market, the disruption in general across the board. Um, I mean, turns out apparently like one of the co-authors was a hedge fund that had short positions before when this was released. I don't know how true that is, but it seems like there was a little bit of like talking your own book when this was released. But like it was a nice thought provoking argument, because there was an aspect of, as more compute, you're going to basically create ghost GDP, where the compute that is generating more compute is generating more compute, and it's just the cycle of capital is circling there, and there's the displacement of the role of the human worker, and that this ends up creating more of issues. And then it touches on the aspect of the SaaSpocalypse, which is, well, all of these software tools are significantly less useful because we have the foundational models, we have agentic. I mean, it's played out as if it's like this doom and gloom horror scenario that we like. To be honest with you, I couldn't help. It's like watching it's like driving on the street and seeing a car crash. You can't help but rubberneck and stare at it for a little while.
Look, I think that the Centrini article was very thought-provoking, and what it did to the market is, I think, fairly typical. I mean, a lot of them, people trade on emotion in the public markets, and like I said, there was I think, a little bit of froth anyway. So I think it's kind of an excuse to for some of the kind of hedge funds or whatever to trim positions, and like you said, there may be even some short selling going on there before. which is, and when you think about it, quite clever in a way. Um, but I think it gets back to, will there be structural issues with the economy with when AI takes hold? I actually think that's true. Will it be a net job reduction? Yes and no. I think there's a lot of areas in the economy that are actually underserviced that potentially need to be serviced. And I think that maybe that's really on sort of an onus on the government to sort of get more training programs in place, maybe different university degrees, uh, or certainly trades colleges and things like that. I had this really interesting anecdotal moment in I was in a taxi in Melbourne recently, and the gentleman in the car was he was from India. He'd spent money on migrating to Australia, had almost finished his computer science degree, and he was driving an Uber because that's kind of his part-time gig there to get a bit of pocket money. And he was telling me that on every Saturday he was learning how to be a carpenter. I said, "Oh, that's
Okay.
interesting." And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "I'm almost done. I've been doing this for a couple of years, part-time. Once I finish my degree in Australia, he then gets a extended visa to stay in the country for a couple of years." He said, "I'm going to be a carpenter." He said, "I can make actually almost double the money in Australia as a carpenter than I can as an entry-level software engineer now."
Oh,
So, I mean, that's a pretty extreme example, but I think there are going to be structural issues with the economy, um, whereby, you can't just go and get a job as on the help desk anymore,
no.
which was, a lot of entry-level IT jobs, particularly in countries like Malaysia, are like help desk, QA, these kind of things. They aren't going to exist in a couple of years. So, you know, you need to think about that. I've got a nephew at the moment who's studying computer science at Monash, and I'm already told him, look, just learn everything you can about AI and how to set up AI. You don't have to be the best coder in the world anymore, but you got to know all the tools. So understand all the different tools, what's their pros and cons, how much do they cost, and you'll be very valuable when you come out in a couple of years because every company's going to need guys or girls like you who understand the nuances and the setup costs and how to go replace something. That's the other thing we didn't talk about in a lot of detail, but
Yeah.
when a CIO has to go out and build his new AI tool, he's got to replace something.
Yep.
So he's got to decommission something and replace it. He can't just ask for more money. It's very unlikely. So, you need people that are able to actually get their head around that so they can then also build the new tool, migrate the data off the old tool, retrain the people. So it's a
Yep.
whole, like consulting exercise in itself. So I think that they're the people that are going to have great jobs in a couple of years, those kind of people.
I think that's a good point for startup founders to understand as well, that if a company is buying a new tool, that they may be switching something out or replacing, whether it's human driven or technology driven, that you need to be able to, when you're selling an organization, be able to understand how you're facilitating any sort of necessary migration, onboarding, integration, etc. And those are the skill sets that are going to drive there. I mean, a lot of the conversations these days is that of whether or not you need to learn coding because the AI is very good at writing it. I think that my personal belief is there's still value in understanding it, but more so from the logical structure. Because if you understand that logical structure, will have a better understanding of how tools fit together, and you get a better understanding of the reasoning in relation to the business processes that you're trying to deal with or tackle. I think your mic cut out.
Won't like that out. Oh, hang on a second.
There we go.
You're back?
Yep.
Yeah, that's because I picked up my phone and unlocked it because I was looking at a tweet that I saw yesterday, and I think my iPad switched over. So the Mark Andreessen tweeted something. I can't see it, but it was something to do with um, that topic. And basically, what he said is that it's still important to understand how to code because it's a different way of thinking about the world, and that you can pretty much frame anything now in the world as code. So, basically, it's still really important to understand coding. You don't have to be a great coder anymore, um, but you do have to understand algorithms and understand, uh, you know, a certain level of information about what's behind the facade of the AI tool. Because at the end of the day, you still have to understand how the tokens are working, how much it's going to cost. You need to understand, if you need to run your own model, what's the pros and cons. Um, yeah, so I think there's still a lot of issues that you need to understand.
Yeah, for certain. But I mean, it is undeniable the productivity gains that people that understand how to use the tools. Um, but I think if I'm not sure the tweet that you're talking about, but I know that he's talked a lot about how we're not necessarily replacing coders, but we're redefining their roles from simply doing the line by line to actually managing and supervising the agents that are doing it. And in order to actually do that effectively, you still need to have some level of understanding of the coding language. And again,
Mm.
coming back to the efficiency, coming back to the aspect of the reasoning and the logic, there's still the necessity of deep fundamentals. They still need to have all of that because you still need to debug, you still need to evaluate AI generated code, and so there's still a lot of layers there. It's a catalyst to drive forward, but it's not necessarily a replacement. It's just at this point in time, it's just an enabler.
Yep, totally agree with that.
But without a doubt, I'm sure you've probably seen the same thing as me, that most of the startups that we're seeing coming out have become overhyped on making sure that the letters AI are spread enough around their pitch decks that it's just screaming out AI, AI. If you're saying anything else, then you might not even be getting your deck viewed. So we're little in this pendulum swinging, but inevitable. That we are at the beginning era of it. It's exciting times. I'm super keen to see where it's going to go. Tech optimist myself. I don't see the doom and gloom. I think humans are incredibly creative at figuring out more work to do. If you look at any of the prior technological eras, we've always seen a net job creation, new roles coming out. I don't think I've ever heard of the role forward deployed engineer before the current era. That's a
Yeah,
new role.
yeah,
Even Salesforce is saying how much they're putting down AI agents, but yet they're hiring salespeople to sell those
yeah.
automated SDRs. So I think the hype is a little overdone. I think we've still got plenty of runway. And who knows? Maybe as we open up orbit and the stars, maybe we'll have more room to expand from there as well. But that's a separate topic.
Oh, no, totally agree, mate. Yeah, I think we're in exciting times, very, very disruptive times. And I think at the end of the day, what I always come back to is the best founders will actually figure out how to create great companies in this era.
That is a great point to end on, Chris. Thank you very much for coming out and joining me. I love the banter. Hope to have you back sometime soon.
Thanks, Kevin. Been great.
All right. And that does it for this episode of Sea of Startups. If you've enjoyed what you've been listening to, please give it a like, give it a review, subscribe to our channel. A little bit of feedback goes a long way in allowing us to keep on putting out these kind of episodes.